What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. So there's a new tiny house law in New York City that's causing quite a stir. So today I'm going to talk about what this new law is, why there are people against it, and what, if any, impact it has on your decision to go tiny in New York City or New York in general. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and let's jump into it. Let's talk about tiny homes in New York City. Alright, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm talking about tiny homes in New York City. When you think about New York City, the first thing that probably comes to mind is traffic and taxis, maybe Times Square, the Statue of Liberty, ferries over to Staten Island, and pizza in Central Park, but probably not tiny homes. But today there's a new law that's recently been approved that's going to sort of change the way that New York City looks when it comes to tiny homes and houses in general, so it's worth talking about it. So I came across this article that was talking about something called the City of Yes Plan. So basically, the City of Yes Plan is coming out of the New York Department of City Planning. It's essentially a plan to change or amend the zoning laws in New York City. Now, their hope is that it'll add over 80,000 new homes in the next 15 years. That's a lot of homes. The part that's important for those of us who are looking to go tiny is the ADU portion of this proposal. So for the ADU portion, it would allow ADUs to be put in the backyards of single-family homes or two-family homes. Now, this was approved by the City Council in December of 2024, so not too long ago from when this video is recorded in July of 2025, but it still has to go through a public hearing, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding this law, so I figured I'd talk about what exactly that controversy is. It's a partnership between the city and an organization called Neighborhood Restore. Their focus is on providing people with assistance when they're making that transition from being a homeowner to potentially being a landlord by putting an ADU in their backyard, amongst other things that they help homeowners do. The purpose of this, from New York's perspective, with this City of Yes opportunity, is that it's going to be a huge win for everyone living in all the boroughs in general. So they say that their plan is to tackle the housing shortage by making it possible to build a little more housing in every single neighborhood. So they are talking about addressing all of the boroughs in New York City and not just one. So they're saying that together that you can make a difference by making the city more affordable without any dramatic changes to any one community. So a part of this is creating a situation where through the zoning laws, it makes it easier for people to have ADUs in their backyards. Now, when it comes to what an ADU is, it depends, right? So there's not as wide of a range of what an ADU is in terms of its definition compared to tiny homes across cities and counties and states in the United States. But for the City of Yes plan, they are imposing some specific restrictions. So you can only have one ADU. So you can only have one in your, one or two family house in terms of the back of your home. It can't be any bigger than 800 square feet. Now, this is where the law is different from some other places. So I know that in California, parts of Washington, like Seattle, and other places in the United States, it just has to be no more than 50% of the square footage of the primary dwelling, no more than 1,200 feet. So they are making them smaller. So that's where I think the tiny house aspect of this comes into play, because they're going to be no more than 800 square feet. So you will get some ADUs in that 400 to 500 square foot range, which would then qualify as tiny homes. They've got a couple of configurations that people can choose from. It can be attached or detached. It could be what they're considering a basement ADU or an attic ADU. That's kind of interesting. The main thing that I thought was interesting is that there is no requirement in terms of parking. Now, I think that's interesting because of some of the concerns that people have, so I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. It can't be more than 2 stories high, so that could potentially be a plus, right? But again, thinking about sizing, right, and what that would look like for those of you who do own homes to have a 2-story structure in your backyard. And it can't obstruct more than 50% of the yard that exists in the current home, right? So it can't take up the entire yard. So they provided an image. City of Yes provided an image of what this would look like in terms of how it would change things aesthetically. Now, again, they're saying that it's not going to make a big change in terms of the overall aesthetic or feel of the community. So in their mind, you're taking a single family dwelling with maybe a garage in the back, and you're going to convert that garage to an ADU, or maybe you'll just add an ADU instead of a garage. That parking area won't be affected, and you won't have any changes in terms of the congestion side of things from their perspective. So that's what they're saying. They're also saying that in general, when these ADU laws are passed, only 5% of people that own homes end up following through and getting an ADU put in their backyard. So it's not like you're gonna see an ADU in every single backyard across all of the boroughs in New York City all of a sudden. The area of New York in particular where this is causing a lot of controversy is Staten Island. There's a lot of community backlash. Even city officials are quoted saying, like, we made a mistake, this proposal shouldn't have gone through, we need to walk it back. Their primary concerns are parking, so that it will just become too congested, right? So if you have a family living in this area and now you put an ADU in the back and maybe there's 2 people living there, now you have 2 more cars, and where are those cars gonna go? They're also worried about increasing the overall density as well and reducing the open space. These are valid concerns, right? And there's no way around that. If you put a house in someone's backyard, like a small house even, you are going to increase the amount of people, the amount of cars, the amount of traffic potentially, and you are reducing the amount of green space and open space because now that yard is less than half of what it used to be. The other side of it, and kind of potentially a downside, is that there seems to be a very slow process and a little bit of confusion around the permitting process since this is all new. So there have been articles where people are talking about how they've started building on an ADU and it's just kind of half built in their backyard and it's been months. So there's been a little bit of a disconnect between what the proposal is and what it's promising and what is actually happening for people who have taken advantage of some of the ADU grants that exist. So there is a program where people can get support either through low interest or no interest loans to build their ADUs in terms of construction in their backyard. So there are already some hiccups, I guess, or potential bumps in the road in terms of implementing this overall proposal. But the main reason why I wanted to bring it up today is there's a couple reasons. One, some of you are looking at New York, you're interested in New York, maybe some of you already live in the New York City area, you're curious about what the tiny house landscape looks like for that particular area. But the other side of it is I just wanted to pose a question, because this is something I was thinking about when I was reading this article, is have we gone too far when it comes to tiny homes and ADUs? So the language that's used, and this is something I've talked about before, but the language that's being used in these articles and in general is that there's a housing crisis, right? And this housing crisis has to be solved. But I'm always curious about definitions, and I have yet to really truly understand what they mean when they say a housing crisis. So I figured I'd talk to you all about this and definitely drop comments. I want to know what you think about the housing crisis in general. Okay, so when we're talking about the housing crisis, are we talking about availability of housing? I do see a lot of articles, and I've even talked to real estate agents that are really convinced that the housing crisis has to do with availability. So the answers there would be zoning and inventory, which we're seeing. We're seeing cities and counties and states change their zoning laws. We're seeing new developments pop up all over the country of all different shapes and sizes. And we're seeing sweeping ADU laws and laws that are trying to make it easier for people to put a tiny house on foundation in their backyard or on a piece of property. So is the housing crisis just about availability? If it is, then this could potentially be a viable solution because you're adding more inventory, right? And you're changing the zoning laws. Is the housing crisis about affordability though? If it's about affordability, then what we're seeing with tiny homes and ADUs, in my opinion, is actually doing nothing to solve the housing crisis, because nothing that I'm seeing is actually really affordable. And a lot of y'all confirm that in the comments when you talk about how tiny home prices have gone up. So we've talked about that. We're talking about ADUs. ADUs are hundreds of thousands of dollars, upwards of $400,000. If you remember my interview with the Dadu guy, that can cost almost $500,000 to get an ADU built here on the West Coast. So if we're talking about the housing crisis related to affordability, I don't personally believe that we're doing much of anything to solve that with what we're doing with tiny homes and ADUs. Is this a crisis of the rental market, or is it a crisis of the housing market? Is rental prices too high? If that's the case, they need to go down, which we're not really seeing. Do we need more rental units? Is the housing market too expensive? If that's the case, new developments would be at an affordable price point, which we all know they're not. So is this a crisis of profits? Which is why I put this image here. This guy sort of like freaking out about the bank and their profits going down. If so, then what they're doing makes sense, because they're incentivizing developers to build new developments. They're incentivizing people to put, ADUs or tiny houses on foundations, which are expensive things. So what is it? I guess is the question that I have for all of you. I have my suspicions about what the housing crisis actually is. I will spare you that rant. I will say, I think most likely it's kind of just language that's used to justify overdeveloping and increasing profits. I personally think it's a crisis of affordability and not availability, but that's just my opinion and that's my perspective, which is based off of things I'm seeing on the West Coast and parts of the East Coast. So definitely drop a comment. What does the housing crisis mean to you? And what, if any, role do tiny homes and EDUs play in that process? This is something I've talked about in several videos so far on the channel. I think it's a really important thing to consider when we're talking about tiny homes because they don't exist in a vacuum. And on the consumer side of things, which is who you all are, it's who I am, this is the things that I see a lot in your comments. You're concerned with the rising prices of everything, right? So we have a housing crisis alongside increased prices for, consumer goods, right? Your food, your housing, your clothes, inflation, job security, wages, all those different things. So again, this kind of goes back to stuff that I've mentioned before, how the tiny house industry exists connected to so many different things, like all the different parts of, manufactured homes and the real estate market and tourism and social media, but then it even just connects to the larger economy. So why am I talking about this? And what does it mean for you as someone who is interested potentially in going tiny, or someone who already has gone tiny, or someone who wants an ADU in their backyard? I think this is something I mentioned before. There are a couple questions that you really need to be asking yourself right now is, should you go tiny, right? And in what way? So that's kind of the main thing. So I want you to really be thinking to yourselves about whether or not going tiny makes the most sense for you, because we are being hit with a lot of messages that it is like the only option, right? But that doesn't mean that's the case for those of you that are watching the channel. So should you be going tiny? If you are, should you be buying land or should you be renting? This is something I talk about a lot on the channel. With less and less tiny house community options for you in terms of buying the land, you really need to be thinking about whether or not you want to own land or you're cool renting. Now, how should you go tiny? This is probably one of the biggest questions you can ask yourself right now, because you can't ignore the fact that prices are going up, and I can't tell you that they're going to go down, because I don't think that would be fair to tell you that I think prices are going to go down. I actually think they're going to keep going up. So you need to really be thinking about whether or not you can build it yourself, or you can work with a builder and do some of the labor to reduce the costs. So how you should go tiny really should be something you're asking yourself. And then when should you go tiny? I don't know. I don't know since I don't have like the ability to see into the future, I can't say when's the best time for you to go tiny right now. I can say there's different seasons of the year that probably are better than others, but I think you need to think about whether or not you should go tiny, like in terms of your timeline. I would say don't wait though. So if you're sitting here watching the channel right now and you're thinking, oh, I've got a few years, maybe I'll go tiny in like 4 years. I feel like tiny houses are gonna be very, very expensive by then. So that's something that you need to consider as well too. All right, so I've given you a lot to think about. I want to know what you think. Make sure you drop comments. There's so much going on in this industry when it comes to laws and changes and prices going up, and then there's just a lot going on in the world around that too. So there's a lot to consider, but it still could be a very exciting time. It's really cool to hear from all of you all who are considering going tiny. So thank you for dropping your stories in the comments. I love reading them. And if you haven't seen my other videos on different things about like the tiny house industry, like are they too big, are they too expensive, you can check those out here. And don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.